So the first question, John, first welcome.
Thank you.
The question I know that's on everyone's mind is, where do we get one of those hats?
Just write us.
Right.
The cool thing about the hat, if you may not be able to tell, it's purple, which means red and blue is purple. Yeah.
That's great. So we themed this year's conference together. And so as soon as that theme emerged, I knew I had to reach out to you because your life work is really about how do we other, how do we belong. This is how I perceive your life's work. You can correct me. How I perceive your life's work is this whole question of how do we create othering, what is a sense of belonging, and how would our society look if we actually created systems that enhanced feelings of belonging and addressed issues of othering. And I think most of us can agree that in our world today, if you look at our political system, mainly we see people very, very, very skilled at knowing how to other, right, and knowing how to get really people pissed off and fighting those who they think oppose them. Right. So there's a lot to go into there, but I first wanted to just hear a little bit about how did you get motivated in this work? Like, what was it that first inspired you? And how did you convince UC Berkeley to create an interesting institution like Othering and Belonging, which is probably not the usual right names that any other of the institutions there have, I'm guessing. So, but maybe first, just how did this work come to you?
Well, starting with the latter question, UC Berkeley is a great institution, and I'd like to think I didn't trick them, but I might have. Because when they brought me here, I'm the founding director of something called the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society.
Okay.
I said, great. Why don't we call ourselves the Othering and Belonging Institute, which we did about 5 years into it. And the reason we did that is because we were looking at a number of marginalized groups, and along the axis of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, age, you name it. And what was clear about all of them is that even though they had their distinct histories, they all were dealing with being othered. And they all were trying to move toward belonging. Yeah. And we wanted to have something that actually cut across our different experiences, but also united our different experiences. And I think how I got to this, and I tell this story, we tell stories about our lives, and they're not lies, but they're not true either. I'm working on a book with Tammy Simon. She's here, I believe, you'll be hearing from her shortly. And I'm talking to someone, they say, well, tell me about when you were 10 or 11, which is a big year for me. And I have memories of it. But I'm old enough and have done enough work to know that my memories of it are not accurate. Yeah. So I'd like to think when I was 5 years old in Detroit, 6 of 9 children growing up who we later would call a ghetto. I didn't realize that when I was 5 years old. And I was out in my front yard. There were no plants, just dirt. First of all, I was really happy. I tell that story because sometimes when people hear it, they say, oh, that was so sad. It wasn't sad, it was great. Unless I missed the marble. And so I'd like to think when I'm playing marbles with my brothers, 3 brothers and 5 sisters, that I was thinking about belonging. But in truth of the matter, I know I was just thinking about that marble.
Yeah.
But it seems to me, once I thought of it, it's like anything else. It's like, this has always been my life. And I just remind people that our attachment to other people, our connections to other people, is not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor, it's a reality. We're born physically attached to another being. And that attachment remains and transforms. This took me a while to really get that. But when I see people struggling, they're struggling because they don't belong. The last thing I'll say on this, there's a fear. And the fear is both physical, political, and spiritual. There's a fear that we won't belong. There's a fear that we won't be seen. And part of what's happening with othering is that some people use othering to create belonging, or use belonging to create othering. It's like this group, we belong. But these people under 6 feet,
Not born in Michigan. I was born
Right,
in
exactly,
Michigan.
exactly. And that's why, in some ways, othering is so powerful, because it's predicated. The promise is, if you band with this group, we can exclude that other group, creating smaller and smaller we's. And our job is to both recognize that we're already connected, but secondly, is that we actually need to create larger we's with our distinctiveness. So we're not going to become, Soren and I are not going to become under 6 feet. At least he's not, I might. I've lost an inch already.
Not planning on it, but yeah.
But it's okay. We have differences, not just between each other, but within ourselves. We have multiple selves. And sometimes they're in harmony, and sometimes they're in conflict, and that's the beauty of it. So part of it is to take the richness of the world and celebrate and tell stories about our connectivity, about our belonging, and a belonging without othering, belonging where every single person belongs. And I say that, and people say, humans, right? What about the earth? And remember that humans come from the word humus, which means from the earth. So when we really acknowledge and celebrate our connectedness, our belonging, we're also celebrating the earth.
Beautiful. And could you say a little bit about how you see social action or social change? Because sometimes people in underrepresented populations will say, we don't all belong. I don't feel like I belong. You know, like we might belong as one human family, but it sure doesn't look like that in our society. And how do we change, or how do we look at what are the structures that support people actually feeling that belonging?
Well, that's a great question. In fact, many of our structures and many of our stories are stories about how we're different, how we can't belong. You know, in some ways, we need complicated stories. We need stories that acknowledge that we already belong, and stories that acknowledge that we practice not belonging. We do both of those things at the same time. And it's not just theoretical. Where you can live, who you can marry. And those questions keep coming up, and they come up in different ways. So it's like, you can't marry those people because they're not really people. When Darwin was around, there was the big debate whether the different races were the same species. And if they're not the same species, they shouldn't be able to reproduce. So somebody said, well, a lot of reproduction going over here. Maybe they're the same species. Darwin was radical because he said there was one human species. And now that seems, what's so radical about that? And so, okay, we can, maybe people of a different race, different religion can marry. What about people of the same sex? What about the people, can people marry two people? So part of the way we try to manage our fear and the change in life, the vicissitudes of life, is to make them stop. So if you think about right-wing propaganda, far right or nationalists or white supremacists, they all are trying to freeze the world in some place that it never was, right? It's like, let's make America great again. And you say, when was that? But those people have to belong too. They all have stories. And one of their stories is that it was great. This is not an exaggeration. It was great between 1850, when slavery was still in force, when women and blacks did not have the right to vote, when Native Americans were stuck on reservations, to 1950. After 1950, that story is, then America went to hell. Okay, let's take the height of that, 1950. In 1950, something like 70% of Americans and 90% of Americans living in rural areas had houses without indoor toilets. Are you telling me you're ready to give up your indoor toilet? That was great going outside in the middle of the night. I don't think so. So how do we tell different stories, and not just tell different stories, but create structures and systems to support those stories? So the Secretary of Transportation says if you look at our roads, if you look at our highways, if you look at our railways, they're a story about separation. They're a story about using infrastructure to say that some people don't count. Many people who do highways will say, you can tell where the black community was, because the highway's going straight, straight through the black community. You could tell where the white community was. How can you tell? How it was going straight, it makes a turn. It turns to preserve the white community. It's built to separate people. So part of our job is not just to think about this internally. Structures do work. Structures carry values. This is one of my favorite examples. Remember the old days before COVID and we used to fly?
Yeah, yeah.
When you go on
with our
plane,
toothpaste, Steve.
with extra space. When you go on a plane, you have to put luggage up over your head. There's a certain part of the population that's shorter by average than the other part of the population. Who are these people, these short people? So, by some accounts, women tend to be shorter than men. To make matters worse, women as a group, not all of them, tend to have less upper body strength than men. And here's something that's really radical, but I hope you won't throw me out when I say it. There's rumors that, on average, women carry more luggage than men. So think about that. So who invented these luggage racks up over your head, right? So that system is actually othering women. That's a system problem.
Right.
So what do women do to try to resolve that problem? They tend to be pretty smart. Many women check their luggage. But now you have to get to the airport an hour early. You have to leave an hour later. And too frequently, your luggage didn't make it. So it also speaks to the limitation of having individual interventions to try to address structural issues. You need structural interventions, and you need new stories to really. And when you look at systems all over, when we think about ADA, people with disability or so-called disabilities, systems, structures, buildings, we're not made for them. They're saying you don't belong here. So we have to think about it's not just an attitude; it's how we actually think about the world. You think about an experiment in terms of medicine. True story. A doctor, black doctor, woman, she goes to the hospital and she says, I want you to test my son for COVID. He's 11 years old. He has all the symptoms. They give him a test, one of these tests where they measure your blood oxygen. And they said his blood oxygen is fine. I think he maybe have asthma. His mom says, I'm a doctor. He doesn't have asthma. I think he has COVID. No, I think he has asthma. They go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, they say, people at the hospital, they say, we'll humor you. We'll give them some other tests. Turns out that not only did he have COVID, that if they had sent him home, he would have died. Turns out the blood oxygen machines built do not read the oxygen level for people with dark skin accurately.
They're never tested on
They
it.
never had. They weren't part of the test group. And so we see that once we start seeing it, it's all over the place. So how do we design structures, systems, so that everyone's included? And it's not that hard. You start by having everyone participate in the design. If black people had been in the design, they would have also been test subjects. If women had been designing those luggage racks, they wouldn't be overhead. And so part of it is just to make sure everybody has a voice and participate, not because some people are smarter than others, because we all have blind spots.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It seems that kind of inherent in this conversation, we should probably talk about loneliness. Because I think the loneliness, as some people call it, an epidemic, but if we look at the statistics in loneliness, they've just skyrocketed. And this was actually before COVID,
Right.
during COVID, and like since COVID. So it's not, and we're more and more connected, if you will, online, digitally than ever. And we're more and more lonely than ever.
Right.
Could you say a little bit about what you feel like is the source of loneliness and,
Right.
and where that is coming from? And are there ways that we can begin to shift that trajectory that we
Right.
need to be on?
Well, there are many different expressions of loneliness. First of all, the concept of loneliness is a new concept. If you go back 300 or 400 years, there was no concept of loneliness. There was a concept called at oneness, that is a person by themselves.
Solitude.
Solitude, right. And the first sort of in Western society, what's called Western society, expression of solitude, if you will, was not solitude. It was privacy. And what is privacy about? From Martin Luther, had this idea. Catholics were kind of communal. And it's like, well, okay, I'm not really down for communal. What if instead of going to God with Soren and my 3 best friends through the priest, we cut out the priest and we just went straight to God? And so the idea of privacy coming out of Protestantism was that it was a relationship where you commune with God by yourself in solitude. Mm-hmm. It's like, think about it. It's like, what are you doing tonight? I'm just partying with God.
Chilling.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds like a cool party. Okay, I go to the party. I'm there. Where's God? Now I'm by myself. That party's no longer cool. So the concept of privacy, which if you go back to Greeks, the word privacy actually means the same as deprived. It means crazy. The Greeks didn't value privacy. It largely became out of the Protestant ethics in terms of resorting to a private relationship with God. Once many of us start having trouble relationship with God, once God's changed her phone number, it's like, I've been calling you all day. If you get the message, call back. It was just loneliness. And so in some sense, we really value this concept of privacy, not realizing it's a deeply religious and spiritual concept. And the other, like without God, it's not necessarily always so cool. But we have the story about private lives, about our inner private space, about by myself. It was never meant to be by yourself. You can't even imagine what it's like to be by yourself. Words require a community. So you can't think without already being in community. And then we have all these edifices. If you go back to the 1950s, when America was great, all the porches were in the front.
Yeah.
So you're going down the street, it's, hi, Miss So-and-so, hi, so-and-so, here are the kids out front. You think about the 1970s and the explosion of suburbanization and the explosion of getting all the people who are super afraid out of the city. Where are the porches? They're all in the back. So now you can drive into your garage, get out of the garage, you don't see your neighbors, go on your porch, you don't see your neighbors. So we created these structures to protect our privacy. And the really bad thing is that God's not there. And then we have this thing called the internet and social media, and it's like, well, you don't have to see your friends, you can just text them. And texting is cool. I mean, I text, but it's not the same. I can text all day. I don't know what you smell like.
Yeah.
Smelling. I mean, that may sound weird, right? Smelling. I have a friend who says, I like this guy, I think, but I haven't smelt him yet. How do I know I really like him? We're animals. We are embodied animals. And what we've done with a lot of things, including tech, is to disembody. And so we connect in the disembodied way. We connect without our physicality. Physicality counts. So one reason we can't have God is because we lost a number. We can't have each other because we're in text. And then at the same time, we're constantly fed this thing of fear. They look different than me, they're shorter than me, they're religious, they talk, they eat differently. And so we got to change the stories that, yeah, they're different, but not all that different. So we have a story in America that actually exaggerates our differences and fear. And how do we deal with our fear in America? Get a gun. And there are not enough guns in the world to quiet our fear. We need each other. That's how we quiet our fear. Rousseau had it right. We quiet our fear by coming together. And if we come together, even if God is not present, my guess is God will be present if we come together, the loneliness goes away.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. And do you see that as a personal journey and a personal choice? Or do you see that there's structures that need to be changed? So, these people have,
Right.
5,000 followers on whatever, Twitter, Instagram,
Right.
whatever, and their experience actually is lonely.
Right.
But they have friends and
Right.
followers, but there's like a structure that is supporting the sense that
Right.
somehow we're connected when we're not really connected
Right,
in the way as animals are connected. And so I'm wondering if somebody finds themselves, do we just need to turn it off? What is the process or path?
I think two things. I think we have to sort of affirmatively engage the kind of future where we all belong. I mean, many of you are probably dog owners. especially those of you who live in San Francisco where there are more dogs than kids. And some of you are kid owners, right?
And wish they were dog owners.
And some of you are hit the jackpot. You have a kid and a dog.
We're inclusive.
So think about this. If I say, you got a newborn, what does your newborn smell like? You know. You know. What does your dog smell like? Yeah. You know. And yes, your dog, what does your master smell like? They definitely know. They know what everything smells like. Then I say, Soren, of your 5,000 friends on Facebook, can you tell me what any of them smell like? You can't. You can't. So I'm not saying Facebook texting is bad. I mean, these are techniques, but they don't adequately take place for us being together physically, like right now.
Yeah.
We need to be together. We need to create space. Life and Death of Great American City. She talks about cities are great because you bring this crush of people together. They interact together. You know, as much as we rag on San Francisco, we love San Francisco. As much as we rag on London, it's like, you know, I say, I was, excuse me, in Europe recently, and I said, if you want to see Europe, go to Berlin. All of Europe, crisscrossing in Berlin. If you want to see the world, go to London. Everybody's there. And there's something messy about it, but there's something magical about it as well. So how do we create more spaces where we can come together? And we're talking to restaurant owners about creating spaces where they invite people to eat together, meet strangers. So we have to be deliberate about it. We have to be proactive. And I think everyone's sort of searching for it. And we have to tell the story that it's okay. So again, the 5,000 friends you have on Facebook. I mean, I have a lot of friends on Facebook, and I really don't know them. I don't go to Facebook. I say, you can go, but I'm not. I tell my friends, you can go look at my first Facebook page, but I'm not. If you really need me, call me or come over. So we have to create that human interaction with people who we think of as different than ourselves, not just with our friends. We have to create connections with people who we don't think of ourselves. And that does something quite magical. And actually, if you do it right, you connect not only with that person, you connect to new parts of yourself. Intimate connections and vulnerability create not only connection between the people, it actually changes the people themselves. And that's the beauty and the fear, that if I hang out with these people, you know, think about the marriage equality. The big fear was, if we have gays and lesbians and trans people marrying each other, is that going to change us? And the sort of safe answer is no, but the real answer is yes. That marriage equality will actually change all of our concept of marriage, inevitably. But it doesn't have to be scary. Because some of those old concepts of marriage are extremely problematic and they need to be changed. The same thing when they argued when blacks and white go to school, the right wing expressed deep concern. If black and white children go to school together, they might marry. And if they marry, some of them might even decide to have sex. I mean,
it could go that far.
They go that far. And the civil rights community's response was, this is not about marriage, and it's certainly not about sex. That you don't have to worry about this. The right wing was right. Black and white children went to school together, and some of them got married, and some of them went straight to sex and skipped the marriage. But my point is, it changed America in some ways. And it's a change that we need to not be afraid of. So how do we actually welcome the future? How do we participate in the future? How do we co-create? And that's a big deal here in the Bay Area, right? Yeah. So now we have a new future where we also have to worry about AI. Yes, it's going to change us, but can we change it in a way that deeply humanize us, that deeply bring us together, that don't substitute us out?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And what do you feel like, because we've all been around people. I was walking in New York recently, and sometimes I feel a sense of togetherness and belonging, and sometimes I don't at all. And I'm curious, in your experience and study, like, what is it when two people are having an interaction? Like, what creates togetherness or a sense of belonging in that interaction versus a sense of othering?
Well, it's a deep resonance, but part of it's just, you know, we used to do this in the at Essalon or whatever, you just look at somebody's eyes.
Yeah.
I'm not
We
feeling
do that
it
here
yet.
sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes a technique, though. But really, it's just being open to people and being vulnerable. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was saying that sometimes he feels open and sometimes he feels closed.
Yeah.
And we close up partially because we're afraid,
Yeah.
because we're feeling vulnerable.
Yeah.
So part of it is the willingness to feel vulnerable and the willingness to slow down, the willingness to, sometime I go into a store and, there's a store clerk there and he said, "How you doing?" And he, she, they will say, "Fine." And I'll say, "Why?" It's like, didn't I already answer your question? And the question, when they say fine, it's really to get away from the question. It's really to not have engagement. And to say fine, I mean, it just sort of messes with their whole thing, right? But then there's a possibility of vulnerability. You're inviting, I really want to know. So why are you fine? And not just from your head, but sink into your body. And then there are all these practices. And the practices have to be large enough to hold our enlightened or heightened sense of belongingness and togetherness. But there could be times when we don't feel together.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't even, I'm a social introvert. And I say, sometimes I even get tired of my own company. And that's part of the deal. It's like, so we can't be high all the time. That opening up to the world means opening up to the great part of the world, but the smelly part of the world, the joys, but also the lows. So I would say we can practice more in terms of love, in terms of kindness. I mean, belonging is a reality. Love is a practice. How do we actually step into that practice?
Yeah, beautiful. So we just have a minute or two left, and I'm curious, is there anything else that we haven't, that's inside your heart that you feel like wants to be expressed?
Well,
considering you're probably the expert on othering and belonging we have right here with us, like anything on your heart that feels important.
well, two things I would say. One, I want to just express my sense of gratitude of being here with you.
Oh, thank you.
And I don't know if we can do it in 1 minute, but I do want to know how you're doing. And part of how we're doing is our suffering and our sadness is really part of our deep stories, but also our joys and our hope. So not that I say with birds have two wings, they need both of them. So we need to be in touch with both. And I so appreciate you inviting me here today, and I hope we can find time to ask those real questions
I hope so
and look into each other's eyes.
I hope
So
so
thank
too.
you.
It's interesting how there's certain people, and I don't know what it is, like there's certain people, we met, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. I still remember what I felt like meeting you. Like, I don't remember what we talked about. I don't remember the interview that we did, but I remember what I felt like in your presence. And so when we were envisioning this, it was like going to be together, I was like, oh, John, but it wasn't because you're an expert in belonging or whatever. It was like, I remembered what I felt like around you. And I was like, I want to feel that again. So it's kind of selfish. And I hope people feel that around me, or some people feel that around me. But I feel like it's so sweet to be with somebody where I feel like, there's people who can talk a lot about what's needed, and there's people who live that. Like there's this saying I've always liked that you can't know the truth, you can only be the truth. Like knowing is kind of superficial. Like it's helpful to know, but knowing and being. And so it's interesting, and I think about that in my life sometimes. Like I may not remember what we talked about, but I'll remember what I felt. And a deep bow for not only like bringing this topic into the world and creating an institute and research and studies and sharing with us what you're learning, but also the fact that you live it is powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. And I hope everyone goes away with that.